right, so hello everyone. I know you didn't get enough of participatory action research, so Dora and I are back with demand on how to really dive into what it is, its origins, where it comes from, background stories, and some emerging theories or where we're going to be taking PAR and some challenges and risks that accompany it. First, what is PAR or PAR? Participatory action research is a qualitative research methodology that involves researchers and participants collaborating to understand social issues and takes action to bring about social change. It is an umbrella term for all research approaches that engage in stakeholders or collaborating others with the research process and making sure that it's a part of every step of the research process. Dora, you want to read the next one?
Sure. The fundamental principles of PAR become equitable co-ownership and co-decision-making with full partnership engagement with academic research, locating powers and ownership at every stage of the research process. Now, in participatory research, there are 4 key elements. And just like you said, everybody's part of the process. There's a partnership, which goes from the researcher and the people being researched. And then there's the approach to it. And the approach can be quantitative, qualitative, or mixed methods. There's also the learning that comes from it, and all partners in PAR learn from the research that is conducted. And there's also the action. That's what sets it apart. We want to make sure that whatever comes from it is actionable and there is change that comes from it. There's a shared decision-making process in participatory research. The research is focused. All members of the research are part of the analysis of how they're going to ask the questions. They might not all do it, but they have the chance to participate in how it's going to be analyzed. Also, because everybody works together and the researcher works with the people needing the research or the people being researched, they can also give a better insight or interpretation as to what's going on. And then decisions are disseminated correctly because the people that were being researched can let other people know what came about the research.
I just kind of want to point out one thing too. Although it is extremely collaborative in order to not kind of achieve any domination of power or struggles or like one opinion having more control over the other. The researcher is the one that's kind of collecting all of the data and putting it together. And one thing that I really find that's interesting about PAR is just how much like self-work you have to do for this particular process as well in order to make sure that everyone's voices are heard. Okay. So PAR comes from 2 different onsets. We're most familiar with the Southern tradition, but the Northern tradition was introduced to us during the 1940s with a man called Kurt Lewin. And he was known to be working both in the US and the UK and proposed this idea of a cycle of continuous inquiry, which kind of goes back to where PAR is now. So it involves action and evolution and it's undertaken by, with or by, as opposed to on or for society's marginalized peoples. The second tradition we're more familiar with as the emancipatory theory and practice, which questions values in research and practice. And it's we know it from Paulo Freire. And so in 1970, he wrote what is almost considered the Bible of, praxis and political power over oppression today within the classroom. And this book was called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which kind of like lays out everything that kind of is participatory action research. So Freire says that individuals are not empty vessels, but objects of inquiry. And this inquiry needs to be full of participants so that we can determine their own needs in order to improve all of our lives. All right. Dora, you want to go with this one?
Yes, key components of participatory action research, or PAR. In 1998 seminal review, Barbara Israel outlined the 8 key components of PAR with communities. She recognized community as a unit of identity, builds on strength and resources within the community, facilitates collaboration and partnership in all phases of the research, integrates knowledge and action for mutual benefit of all partners, promotes a co-learning and empowering process that attends to social inequalities, involves a cyclical and iteratory process, addresses health from both positive and ecological perspectives, and disseminates findings and knowledge gained to all partners. And that's what makes PAR different than other research.
So this particular diagram kind of is a nice little illustration on the organizational process of how your collaborative committee or group, however it's going to lay out, works together. And it's also very important to note that it's not necessarily like a starting and ending point, but it continues to revolve around itself and you're going to readdress these issues on multiple times, and you're going to learn new things and you're going to let go of other things during this whole process.
The whole process is a spiral where you're learning new things and you spiral in what you learned to go with it.
All right, so the background of participatory action research, from what I have researched, I found that it's interesting that in the early 90s, participatory action research actually started more in healthcare. It was the primary use because it like reached out to the individuals and with their qualitative like concerns was able to address them. Many of the first primary healthcare participatory researchers were also family physicians practicing in indigenous communities in North America, who understood the frustrations of indigenous people being researched to death through helicopter research. And I found this fascinating, particularly because my work is diving into decolonization. And so with this concept of helicopter research, what that means, it's a derogatory term where these researchers would basically parachute into the communities and just go about with their own agendas and gather all this material and then leave without ever sharing the results, and maybe not even having any concern of the emotional and physical impact that it's going to have on that community. To address this problem, the American Indian Law Center adopted several ethical principles that outlined how individuals and communities should participate as partners in the research process. And that also has kind of like led and kind of formulated the concept or how to organize participatory action research in an ethical way. Sure.
The major growth impact. Since the early 2000s, there's ever increasing acknowledgement in many countries that participatory action research strengthens academic community relationships. It ensures relevance of research questions. It increases capacity of data collection, analysis, and interpretation. It minimizes the negative or stigmatized effects of research on the partners, and it enhances program recruitment, sustainability, and extension. And this is usually because everybody works together and it's such a transparent process. And once you're part of it, and you get to trust more when they're doing research on a group of people or your group of people, if they let you be part of the process. So many projects last 1 to 2 decades by a ripple effect of building subsequent phases on their earlier successes. And this is where the cycle of the picture she was showing you, the diagram right now, this is why it lasts so long, because we take what we need and then we discard what we don't need, and then we spiral in what we did learn and what we need, and we keep going in that way.
All right, so there are some challenges and risks, although I'd like to believe that participatory action research is like, the one-stop shop and is the best approach, because it is so collaborative. there are risks that the researchers will apply their own benefit or solely to co-opt the patients to increase enrollment, to keep it going for response rates. So the question is, will researchers develop equitable partnerships and not have these predetermined or kind of like benefit, yeah, from their own like aims or goals, you know? And so it's almost a catch-22. You rely on these people to provide an equitable situation, but at the same time, you're demanding that they continue to do this and need to stay in it, and is that equitable as well? And then kind of like on that same topic, some participatory action research, it's kind of short term, and it's kind of like the precursor to further research that needs to happen just to get the wheels turning. So in these particular situations, what will happen to those partnerships? And they say at the end of a grant, because usually a grant is needed in order to kind of like create this committee and get all this research out there. Do you stay in contact with these committees? Do you continue to have them be a part of every process, or do you just kind of like cut them at, once this one part of the cycle has evolved? So it's tricky maintaining those relationships and making sure that you don't burn any bridges along the way. Dora and I really wanted to kind of take all the steps in the process of PAR and put it into our own context to kind of give you another idea of different ways on how to use it. So my proposed dissertation topic is essentially how can I'm proposing arts-based participatory action research to document and explore how a collective of teachers, administrators, community members, and then I also want to add tribal members, work collaboratively to develop decolonizing curriculum and instructional strategies in the New Mexico educational system. And of course, mine's already evolved from this, but this is where we're going to take this particular conversation right now. So when you come up with your topic and you realize that you want to do participatory action research, you kind of create an outline addressing certain issues so that you could appropriately and ethically go about creating your committee. And so these topics are identifying the issue, thinking about a solution, planning the study, and then planning the impact. All right. So for me, several questions I need to think about when addressing each of these topics is, what is the issue or problem with curriculum in New Mexico? And also within the United States. Why do these problems exist? And I'm putting everything in a question because I can't answer these topics myself because they would just be biased and skewed. And so these are all the things that I will be talking about with my committee in order for us to gain a sense of knowledge and where to go with our methods. So another question I'm asking is what curriculum is currently being used and how does it culturally relate to or affect our learners in New Mexico, specifically our Indigenous and emergent learners and those with disabilities. What does decolonizing curriculum look like? There's lots of research about theory. There's not so much research about practice. And so there's our window, there's our opening to why we're doing, this type of research. And then also how are our struggles for liberation bound with each other? That specifically, kind of is my personal issue because I'm kind of like the white card on the committee. But I need to constantly understand my own positionality within this committee and how it contributes to the group. And so does everyone else. So thinking about a solution. So again, how to create. So we look into like, what is a decolonized curriculum? And then we take some of those components And with the committee, we are kind of addressing this ultimate overarching theme of how to create an ethical decolonized curriculum. And so then we kind of go into what do we already know about curriculum and what is being currently used in New Mexico. And then what or who do we need to know to change curriculum in New Mexico? And this really kind of feeds into like policymakers and other stakeholders that maybe are like further reaching out from the particular group that we're researching. So in planning the study, some questions that we need to acknowledge are what resources do we need to, in order to decolonize curriculum? How will decolonizing curriculum benefit educators and learners in New Mexico? How will a participatory action research committee be selected? How will all of the voices be heard? How will confidentiality and privacy be disseminated throughout the study? And should the research only represent the reality of the people and communities involved, or all of New Mexico? So basically saying like, do we need to widen our search? Okay. Lastly, what are the common themes that have emerged in the research? How can, we can anticipate what they're going to be, but we can't really answer these until the data has been collected. How can these themes be summarized to benefit educators and learners and the wider community? How will the curriculum be disseminated? So after it is created, who is it going to be available to? And what is that timeline? How can participatory action research prevent a proposed decolonized curriculum from recolonizing education in a different format? That's my biggest fear. And I think I think I'll have a very strong limitations section in my dissertation about it's a really gray line. And it's a very touchy, if you do one thing or you don't relook and constantly, you could be doing exactly the same damage that you were trying to prevent. And what are the criteria we use to assess the adequacy and efficacy of decolonizing curriculum? And I think that really plays into our discussion this week about authenticity, and the ethics of really looking at the data and looking at the researcher. So here's a fun little diagram that basically kind of goes about 4 different things that really need to be considered when creating a decolonizing curriculum. And so these are overarching themes and topics that we will be using. And then because participatory action research is all about action, we have to create a proposed plan for change. And so there's 4 stages: development, negotiation, implementation, and reflection. And so for each of these, I have different tasks, basically like a timeline of what we're doing for the process of creating this change or writing the decolonized curriculum. So within the whole development stage, we need to read lots of literature about decolonizing curriculum, make sure that everything has been done or we're knowledgeable about all different elements of it, research how other countries have integrated and indigenous methods into their curriculum. Then we need to gather a research collective that consists of teachers, administrators, parents, community members, and again, I'm adding tribal members to this. And specifically, because I am broaching on the topic of diving into the topic, not broaching into the topic of decolonization, I need to make sure that there is a significant representation of indigenous people on my committee. For negotiations, the collaborative needs to define what decolonization is in education before anything else can happen. And then we need to establish and agree upon the different types of educational spaces and learning environments that we want to research and create for. We also need to agree upon different types of teaching methods and strategies within the classroom that the curriculum is going to assist with. And lastly, another thing that we really need to focus on are the different types of materials, processes, and resources that will allow us to do this type of curriculum. So when implementing the PAR process for change, after everything has been approved and we get our funds to go about doing the research, then the collective members will get approval from the different spaces that we're doing the data and research from. Currently, right now, I would say where I'm currently working is going to be the main place, but there may be multiple places and institutions that we are kind of like taking the data from. Lastly, when we're reflecting upon the data, we're going to go through the transcripts of interviews and analyze different types using a qualitative research program. I think that's important to note. And then we will collect, the collective will review and confirm that those transcripts and interpretations are done in an authentic way. As for the projects that we may be utilizing when gathering the data, the participants will assess usefulness of the project, and the collective will meet to identify what was accomplished, as well as future directions for the collaborative work to go from there. So, I mean, obviously this is going to change, evolve, and there's a lot of things because right now everything is completely proposed. And so we don't really know where we're going to go from here. And it could be that something like happens in the development stage that completely triggers a domino effect and changes everything, every part of the other stages. But in general, this is the process that will be taken for my particular study.
So in my particular study, my passion is English language learners, and I think everybody knows that. And I'm always trying to level the playing field for them. So with my proposal, I was thinking of English language learning students in high school that have been classified by teachers according to social traditions, subjective perceptions of effectiveness, and an incomplete comprehension of how students acquire a second language. These categorizations have frequently relied on flawed assumptions about students and their families. Consequently, students who are engaged in the process of acquiring a new language frequently experience feelings of seclusion and classification. The instructor initiates the process by selecting students who are presently emerging bilinguals to act as delegates in order to aid in the formulation and implementation of the idea. So my idea is to get students that are usually set aside by teachers, because it's unfortunate that students come to this country and they're US citizens. They just haven't grown up in the US. They have all the US rights. And even if they didn't, I'm not immigration. It's my job to teach, not to check a green card. So I get really upset when teachers just buddy them up with somebody else. And then the English language learner who doesn't know any English and is just listening and trying to grasp everything, and they're already in high school and they're trying not to give up, and they're using their first language to get to the second language. It's frustrating for them when they don't have an outlet or somebody to talk with, or the traditions are different. And they are very different just across the border, even though we're sister cities. I live in El Paso, and they're different in the sense that students have different curfews. What do you mean your parents still expect you to be home by 9? Whereas students, even though they're from Mexican traditions, they might not have such a rigid curfew as students who are new, and then, or they can't participate in football games because they're US citizens, but they still live in Juarez and they commute every day. So it gets too late to be going over to a city that's crime ridden, and they don't stay for football games, and they don't, essentially it builds two different cultures within a school. So I'm trying to merge those two cultures in a way that they would work together, to where students don't forget their language. The students who do have Mexican roots and the new students who are coming in feel that they are empowering the students that are already here as they're learning from the students that have been here for generations. So that's generally my idea. Now, in my issue, I want emergent English speaking students who are placed in 3 categories. Individuals who are recent arrivals, possess only proficiency in Spanish language, are subject to being disregarded. This is where they just move to the side and sit over here and just listen to what the class is doing. Individuals that have a certain level of proficiency, because we do have a lot that'll finish the first 6 years elementary school in Mexico, and then they come over 7th, 8th, middle school traditionally, right? So they have some English, but they still need another student to be with, and the teacher does a little or any real teaching to those students. They rely on somebody else assisting them. Or we have individuals who have assimilated to English customs and demonstrated proficiency in the language and are more readily assisted by educators because they know more English. Now, these 3 categories, I didn't come up with them. I literally talked to my students, and they're the ones who came up with the categories. They're like, they'll put us in one of 3 categories, miss. If you're brand new, it's like, okay, well, just sit there and we're going to determine if you really want to learn the language, and everybody learns differently. Or if you are not willing to learn the language. We do have individuals that they do not want to lose, and with all rights, they don't want to lose their first language. So a lot of teachers take that as, oh, you really don't want to learn, and they dismiss them. But they notice that the more you assimilate to English customs, not celebrating Mexican holidays like Day of the Dead, and not celebrating 16 de septiembre, which is Mexican independence. The more they assimilate to English customs, then they're more likely to be helped and by teachers. Educators are more willing to, oh, you want to speak English? And I'm like, no, you help all of them. So it's unfortunate that they identified the issue, because I really do talk to my student population, and they're the ones who identified the issue for me. So thinking about a solution, I was brainstorming with my critical friend groups are my sisters sometimes. So I was brainstorming because I thought I really want to do something I want to do a change. I want to impact, and how can I? And then I told them about the problem, and one of my sisters works for the city, the local city where we're in. And she said, the best way to save on money is through volunteer programs, because nothing will go through if there's money attached to it. But if you get people to volunteer, then it's easier for something to get approved. And that made me think of, I rely on my sisters. And then I started thinking of, oh, big sister, little sister. And then I started thinking of big brother, little brother, like the program. So with that in mind, the solution for me, or the thought process behind my solution, is to create individualized interactions with mentors to facilitate essential social and emotional growth required to foster resilience and advance mental health and overall well-being of emergent bilinguals while honoring their home language. Have them do Posada in December, have them do a presentation on 16 de septiembre, have them do a presentation on Day of the Dead, not just in Spanish class, but as a cultural presentation to honor who they are. So according to the affective filter, unpleasant feelings like stress, anxiety, boredom, and apathy produce the psychological filler that hinders the student's ability to comprehend what they're being taught. So if they're not understanding what they're being taught, it's because they don't feel like they belong. So we want to make them feel like they belong and that they're part of the school community. So upon enrollment in the state of Texas, parents are given a home language survey. Parents are requested to fill out a home language survey, which is utilized for the assertion of appropriate placement of the student into the emergent bilingual program, similar to the manner in which parents are requested to complete a survey during the registration process. I would recommend, or the committee would recommend, because again, I was talking to my students, that students complete an interest survey. Now, this would enable volunteer mentor students to effectively identify the most suitable match for a new student mentee. So if they said that they like baseball, okay, let's give the card to the baseball team. Maybe they can do intramural gaming, or they could practice with a team if they don't feel like they're playing with a team. Sometimes they're really good and they just join the team and they don't even realize they could have joined the team. So we were thinking of ways to put volunteerism and students who are coming in together, because in order to graduate in our school district, you need 80 hours of volunteer work. So the kids are always trying to figure out ways to do volunteer service will it count to our volunteer? We do Big Brother. So when I was explaining, when we're all coming up with the idea and brainstorming, they love the idea that students who are already enrolled can take credit hours for volunteer service, because what better way to volunteer than in your own school community, which you spend 12 hours a day. So when we're planning the study, the implementation of mentor-mentee program for emerging bilinguals requires the involvement of student volunteer groups and the approval of administration to have a positive impact on all parties involved. Student organizations and teachers who volunteer for the language committee will make the decision. So it's a two-part again, students and teachers, and planning the impact. Frequently reoccurring topics encompass the advantages of mentor-mentee programs and their outcomes on educational institutions, ultimately extending to the broader community. So once they start seeing that, hey, it works in school, then my family knows your family, and let me go ahead and help them get a job, or let me go ahead and help them, tell them where they could apply, or let me, whatever the case may be, point them to a place of worship that they could go to. And that's how communities are really formed. So that's exactly what I would want to, or what I envision of doing in some future with my students. Okay, so the stages are development. In development, researcher discusses experience with emergent bilinguals. Researchers discuss a plan for a mentoring initiative with other emergent bilingual educators. They collect data on emergent bilingual social and emotional development. We do like a check-in. We do have a program where, how are you feeling today? And it's just an emoji in case they can't really read English yet. So at least they could tell us how they're feeling that day. And if we do a first period, it alerts the other teachers throughout the day what they're feeling, because they do come with a plethora. Not only is it high school, it's high school in a new country, and they probably woke up at 4 a.m. to be in school on time. So we want to make sure that teachers know this. Negotiation, researchers agrees to share a proposal for impact on all students. Implementation, no funds needed for approval. This would all be voluntary in both teachers and students, and the application by means of student learning committees.
So there you have it, you guys. What I really liked is that Dora and I have two completely very different concepts and approaches of participatory action research and how we want to go about facilitating change. So I hope that with this new awareness of where participatory action research comes from, and the actual process and how to go about creating change, and also keeping in mind some of the emergent problems and risks that come from it, that maybe participatory action research is something that you would be interested in doing as well. I know that we are very excited about it. So do you have anything else to add to, Dora?
No, the only thing with participate, for me, the only thing with PAR is I want change in so many places that it's like, oh, that looks good. Oh, that looks good. Oh, I want to do it here. And it takes a while for it to go through. It can't be something that you just, I can't be a social butterfly about it and then just touch on it and then move on. Like, you have to really commit to one and then stick with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, you seem to be so much more directly, connected, whereas I feel like mine's a little bit like up here because I'm creating this big curriculum. And so I think that's something that I need to be aware of with the change, is that it is connected to an individual for change. So how can that reflect it as well? All right. Well, we're gonna sign off. Hope you guys are doing great.
See you guys in June.
Woohoo! Bye-bye.